Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to dig into a pretty big policy shift in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we're talking about the recent reduction in immigration targets.
Okay.
We've got a whole bunch of news articles and even some pretty interesting and maybe even heated discussions
Yeah.
from Reddit that we're going to kind of unpack.
Okay.
And, you might be thinking like, wait a second.
Right.
Isn't Canada known for being super welcoming to immigrants?
Yeah, that's the image.
Right. But
Exactly.
things seem to be changing.
Yeah, they are.
And we're going to look into why that might be happening.
Absolutely. So I think what we're seeing is a government that's really grappling with a lot of different competing pressures.
Right.
On the one hand, you have this image of Canada as a haven for newcomers.
Mm-hmm.
But then internally within Canada, there are growing concerns about whether the country can actually keep pace with this influx of people,
Right.
especially when you think about housing and social services.
Yeah, okay.
Those are big issues.
Let's break this down a little bit.
Yeah.
So the Canadian government recently announced a 20% reduction in immigration targets
Huge.
over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So what's going on? Like, what led to this sudden shift?
Well, if you look at some of the economic data that you shared with me,
Okay.
you see economists starting to warn about a mismatch between population growth
Right.
and the availability of affordable housing.
Okay.
You've got banks kind of flagging the strain on infrastructure, and even government reports are starting to acknowledge that there's a rising cost of living. So,
Right.
essentially, alarm bells were ringing.
Yeah, it sounds like they were getting a lot of heat to try to address this.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about economics, right? I mean, there were concerns from average Canadians as well.
Oh, absolutely.
People were saying, hey, wait a second, this is affecting my life.
Yeah, and the articles you shared highlighted a growing unease among Canadians about the impact of high immigration on their quality of life. I mean, housing affordability is huge. It became a major sticking point, especially in places like Toronto and Vancouver, where competition for housing is just fierce.
Yeah, and it's not just economics either.
No.
It seems like there was also maybe this feeling that maybe things were moving a little too fast.
Yeah.
And it was putting a strain on kind of the social fabric of Canada.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
You see these anxieties reflected in some of the Reddit discussions that we pulled.
Mm-hmm.
And you see people starting to express concern about maintaining kind of a cohesive national identity amidst this rapid demographic change that's happening.
Okay, so it's a complex issue.
It is. It really is.
With, deep roots.
Deep roots.
And
but it's definitely something that is coming up more and more in the political discourse.
Yeah, and then to make things even more complicated, you've got pressure coming from the U.S.
Right.
Apparently, they've been urging Canada to tighten its borders.
Interesting.
And this is probably because of concerns about irregular migration.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So how did this kind of external pressure play into Canada's decision to do this?
I mean, it's hard to say for certain how much influence the U.S. had.
Okay.
But the timing is definitely interesting.
Yeah.
If you look at the timeline of events and the sources you provided, this policy shift seemed to happen right after a series of pretty high-level meetings.
Oh, wow.
Between Canadian and U.S. officials.
Yeah, so it's like pressure from within and outside.
Exactly. It seems like it.
All right, so they're getting squeezed from both sides here.
Kind of, yeah.
But this seems like kind of a major departure for the Liberal Party.
Yeah.
I mean, how's Trudeau explaining this?
It's a delicate balancing act for him.
Yep.
He's acknowledged that they might not have gotten the balance quite right, particularly after we saw that pandemic surge in immigration.
Yeah.
But he's also emphasizing that immigration needs to be sustainable, and it needs to benefit all Canadians.
Okay.
So that's kind of the line he's trying to walk.
Okay, so Marc Miller, who's the immigration minister,
Right.
he used this really kind of striking analogy.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
He talked about having to land a big bunch of policy planes.
Oh, yeah. What did he mean by that?
I know, right? What do you think he meant by that?
I think it's just a really vivid image
Yeah.
that captures the urgency
Yeah.
of this situation.
It seems very sudden.
Yeah, and I think the policy planes he's referring to are like all the different immigration programs and streams that Canada has in place.
Okay.
And landing them means finding a way to manage this flow of newcomers
Right.
in a way that doesn't overwhelm the entire system.
So it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
We got to hit the brakes.
Exactly.
Figure this out.
Yeah.
But this seems like it's caught a lot of people off guard.
Yeah,
Especially
definitely.
international students.
Right.
Must be freaking out.
Well, yeah, the decision has had a huge impact on international students.
Okay.
Especially those who came to Canada hoping to maybe settle there permanently. One of the biggest changes is this new cap on the number of students allowed to enter the country.
Oh, wow.
Each year.
I didn't realize they were doing that.
Yeah, it's a big change.
Okay, so what's been like the fallout of that? Because I know some of the sources mentioned that there was a surge in asylum claims.
Yeah, that's right.
From students.
Yeah, a lot of these international students are coming to Canada on study permits that allow them to work and study and get some Canadian work experience. In the past, this was a good pathway to permanent residency.
Okay.
But with these new caps and with immigration pathways tightening, students are finding that their options are more limited.
Yeah.
And some of them are facing the prospect of having to go back to countries where there just aren't that many opportunities.
Yeah.
Or they're facing persecution. So they're turning to the asylum system.
As like a last resort.
As a last resort, exactly.
So they're basically saying, I came here as a student.
Right.
But now I need asylum.
Yeah. It's bleak. Exactly. To stay. Yeah. And this has raised a lot of questions about the integrity of the asylum system.
Yeah, because how do you
determine? If you know who's who.
Right. Because if the pathway to permanent residency is getting harder, then
they have to find another way.
Right. And this is the way.
Yeah.
So some people are saying they're taking advantage of the system.
Right.
Others are saying, hey.
They're desperate.
They're desperate.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
It's a tough one.
It's like a real dilemma.
It is for policymakers.
Yeah.
They have to strike a balance between protecting Canada's borders, but also upholding Canada's humanitarian obligations.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It's a delicate balancing act with very high stakes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a closer look at the asylum system.
Okay.
Before we get into that whole debate.
Yeah.
How does it even work?
Well,
what are the challenges that it's facing?
Yeah. So Canada's asylum system is designed to offer protection to people fleeing persecution in their home countries.
Okay.
It's a pretty complex process.
Yeah, I bet.
But basically, anyone who's claiming asylum, they have to be able to demonstrate what's called a well-founded fear of persecution.
Right.
And that persecution has to be based on things like race, religion, nationality,
got it,
political opinion, or membership in a particular social group.
Right. So you can't just be like,
you said,
I want a better life.
No, it's not about escaping poverty or seeking better economic opportunities.
Right. You have to prove that.
You have to prove that you are facing a real threat.
Got it.
To your safety or freedom.
Okay. So that's where it gets kind of tricky.
Yes, especially with these international students.
Yeah, because how do you measure that?
It requires a very, very careful examination of the individual's circumstances.
Right.
You have to look at the conditions in their home country and the specific threats that they face.
Yeah. Okay, so this surge in asylum claims from students.
Yeah.
What are the main arguments on each side?
Well, on the one hand, you have those who say that many of these students are basically exploiting the system to try to get around immigration rules.
Yeah.
They say, look, these students are only applying for asylum once their study permit expires or their application for permanent residency gets rejected.
Okay.
So they see it as kind of like
a loophole.
A loophole, yeah.
Yeah.
A way to kind of game the system.
Stay in Canada.
And stay in Canada, yeah.
And what about the other side? What do they say?
Well, they say that many of these students are genuinely facing very difficult circumstances.
Okay.
They point out that these tighter immigration pathways are leaving a lot of students feeling trapped and desperate.
Right.
They say that for some of them, going home could mean facing economic hardship, social stigma, or even persecution.
Right. So it's hard to know.
It is.
Who's who?
It really is.
Like, who's telling the truth?
Exactly. And that's the challenge for policymakers. They have to find a way to protect Canada's borders, but also uphold their humanitarian obligations.
That's a tough one.
It really is a delicate balancing act.
Yeah, I remember in one of the articles, Marc Miller was talking about this.
Oh, yeah. What did he have to say about it?
He seemed to be trying to acknowledge the need for a system, but also address the concerns about people potentially misusing it.
Right. I think he was very careful not to paint all asylum seekers with the same brush.
Right.
He emphasized how important it is to treat each claim on a case-by-case basis, recognizing that there are genuine refugees in there. But he also said that there might be a need for some reforms to the system to prevent abuse.
To make sure it's sustainable?
And to make sure that the system can be sustained.
So he's not dismissing the concerns?
No, not at all.
But he's also saying, hey,
let's be compassionate.
Let's be cautious and compassionate.
Yes, exactly. And that message seems to resonate with a lot of Canadians. Public opinion on immigration is complex. It's nuanced.
For sure.
There's a growing awareness of the challenges that come with high levels of immigration. But Canadians also have a lot of empathy for people who are seeking refuge in their country.
Those Reddit discussions really show that.
They're fascinating.
Yeah, we see people expressing concern about the economic impacts of immigration. And then other people are saying, look, we have a moral obligation to help these people.
Exactly. And it was interesting to see how intensely people felt about this.
Yeah, it's very personal for a lot of people.
It is. It's tied to their own experiences and anxieties about the future.
Yeah, and it reminds you that these aren't just policy decisions in the abstract. These have an impact on real people.
Absolutely. They have real-world consequences.
Yeah, and it's interesting how those discussions kind of went beyond just the asylum seekers.
Well, went broad into
like broader questions about Canadian sality values.
Yeah, for a lot of Canadians, immigration is tied to their understanding of what it means to be Canadian. There's a sense of pride in Canada's reputation as this multicultural and welcoming nation. But there's also this sense of unease about the pace and the scale of change. And this desire to make sure that immigration is actually benefiting all Canadians.
So you have these two sides kind of clashing.
It's a tension for sure.
So how do we maintain this reputation as being welcoming?
But also say,
hey, but also manage it.
We need to manage this in a way that works for us.
So that's a tough question.
That is the question.
For the policymakers.
That's what they have to grapple with. How do we reconcile these competing priorities?
How do we balance compassion with pragmatism?
That is a really good question.
It goes to the heart of who Canada is. And its role in the world. And you know, one area where we're seeing this play out specifically is in the debate over economic immigration. We've been so focused on the asylum seekers. But there's also been a shift in how Canada is approaching skilled worker immigration.
So that has big implications for the economy.
Huge implications.
We haven't really talked about that.
No, we haven't.
What's going on there?
Well, for years, Canada has relied on immigration to fill labor shortages and drive economic growth. They have this points-based system that prioritizes skilled workers, people with in-demand skills and qualifications. But even with this system in place, certain sectors are still facing critical labor shortages.
Like what?
Like healthcare technology, the trades.
So we have all these immigrants coming in.
But we still have these shortages.
Yes. And that's why this recent policy shift is so important. Because by reducing the overall immigration targets, the government is also impacting the number of skilled workers coming in. And this has a lot of business leaders worried.
Because they need those workers.
They need those workers. They're concerned that Canada won't be able to compete globally if they don't have access to this skilled workforce.
So it's like they're trying to walk this tightrope between we need to address these housing concerns and social services.
But we also need to make sure our economy has the workers it needs to function.
And it's getting harder and harder as things change globally. You've got the aging population, the rise of automation, geopolitical instability.
Like the world is changing.
All of these things are creating all these new challenges and uncertainties.
So going back to that landing planes analogy, it's a turbulent flight. It's a lot to manage.
They're trying to navigate through some really choppy air. With multiple priorities.
And a lot of pressure to not crash.
And a lot of pressure, And all of these decisions have an impact on people, on families, and on communities across the country.
And that's what all these sources have been showing us.
It's
like the human side of this.
The human stories behind all of this.
We hear about international students who are freaking out about their future business leaders who are like,
wait,
what are we going to do?
How are we going to do this?
We need these workers. And then just everyday Canadians who are struggling with rising costs.
It's a reminder that these aren't just numbers.
Exactly.
These are real people with hopes and dreams and anxieties about the future.
And one of the things that really stuck out to me was that public opinion is having a big impact on all of this.
Oh, absolutely. Public opinion is a powerful force.
Yeah. Politicians are always paying attention to how their decisions are going to play with the voters.
Right.
And immigration is one of those issues where public opinion is very divided.
Yeah.
There's no simple answer.
Right, like how many immigrants should we let in?
Right.
What's the ideal mix?
Yeah. Should we focus on economic immigration or family reunification or refugees?
It's complicated.
It is, and we see that in those Reddit discussions.
Yeah, some people want stricter border controls.
Yeah.
And other people are like, let's be more compassionate.
Let's welcome everybody.
Yeah. So it's this
microcosm of the national conversation on immigration, and it's not going away.
Right.
This conversation is going to continue as Canada tries to figure out how to deal with all of this.
With a changing world.
In a changing world, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a conversation we need to have.
We do.
We need to listen to each other.
Yeah.
We need to understand.
You need to understand
why people feel the way they do.
And try to find ways to bridge those differences.
Because at the end of the day...
this
is about people.
It is about people.
It's not just about numbers.
Exactly. It's about what kind of society we want to build.
Yeah.
For ourselves and for future generations.
You know, as we've been talking about this whole shift in Canada's immigration policy, it makes me think about what this means for Canada on, like, the world stage.
Right, like their image.
Yeah, because they've always been seen as
welcoming.
This very welcoming,
inclusive
country. But this kind of feels like a step back.
It's a really interesting question because for decades, Canada has really carefully cultivated this image.
Right.
Of being a welcoming and inclusive nation.
Yeah, a beacon of multiculturalism.
Exactly.
And now they're doing this.
Especially with what's going on globally.
Yeah, with the refugee crisis.
It could be seen as Canada kind of retreating from that image.
Yeah, it's almost like Canada's at a crossroads.
It does feel like that.
Trying to figure out,
yeah,
okay, what do we do?
Right. How do we balance our international reputation with what's happening here on the ground?
Like what people are saying.
Exactly.
So.
And it's not just Canada either.
Yeah.
We're seeing this in a lot of Western countries where you have economic anxieties, concerns about social cohesion, and it's leading to these more restrictive immigration policies.
So is this it? Is this the end?
Oh, that's a big question.
Of like open borders and mass migration?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But we can definitely say that the global landscape is changing.
Yeah.
And these traditional ideas about immigration are being challenged.
Right.
We're seeing the rise of populism, nationalism, and a lot of skepticism towards globalization. And these trends are having a huge impact on how countries approach immigration.
Yeah. So it's like Canada's trying to figure out, okay, how do we manage all this?
Right. How do we meet our economic needs?
Right.
But also do what's right on the humanitarian front.
And that sounds really hard to do.
It's incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
You have so many competing interests and priorities that you have to try to balance.
Okay, so what are some of those?
Well, you have to make sure that immigration is benefiting the Canadian economy, but you also have to listen to people who are worried about the cost of housing.
Right, affordability.
Affordability, yeah. And the strain on social services.
Right.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you have to uphold Canada's commitment to human rights and refugee protection.
But then we also have to protect ourselves.
Exactly, and keep the country safe.
Right.
So it's a lot.
And it's all happening.
Yeah.
While the world is changing.
The world is changing so quickly.
Right.
You have climate change.
Right.
You have all this technological disruption, geopolitical instability. All of these things are creating new waves of migration, and countries are having to rethink everything.
Yeah, they have to.
About their immigration policies.
Yeah. And it seems like maybe this policy shift is a sign that Canada is like, okay, how do we fit into all of this?
Right. Where do we fit in this new global landscape?
Yeah, but
it's tough.
There are no easy answers.
There really aren't.
And that's why it's so important to talk about it.
Exactly. We need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And they need to be informed and nuanced.
Yeah, we need to think about this carefully.
Yes, we need to go beyond these simple slogans.
Right.
You know, like open borders versus closed borders.
Right.
It's much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
We have to engage with the complexity of immigration in the 21st century.
So we got to think about the economy.
Yeah.
The social impact.
The social impact.
The human side of this.
The humanitarian aspects of it.
Yeah, we have to balance everything.
Exactly. We have to find ways to balance all of these different interests.
Complicated.
It is, but it's also what needs to be done.
So we got to do.
Yeah.
So the future of immigration.
Yeah.
Not just in Canada.
Right. All over the world.
Depends on whether we can have these conversations.
Exactly. We need to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Listen to each other.
Understand each other.
Try to understand different perspectives.
Yeah.
And find some common ground.
Because it's about people.
Yeah. Immigration is about people.
Yeah.
And it's about what kind of world we want to live in.
Well said.
Thank you.
This has been a real eye-opener.
A lot to think about.
Yeah, a lot to think about.
For sure.
And this is going to keep going.
Oh, yeah. This issue's not going away.
Yeah. It's going to keep evolving.
It is, and we'll be keeping an eye on it.
So we'll leave you with this thought.
Okay.
If you were in charge of Canada's immigration policy, what would your top priority be?
That's a good question.
What would be the most important thing to you?
Yeah, would it be the economy? Would it be social cohesion? Would it be protecting vulnerable people?
Yeah, or all the above?
Maybe all of the above.
But how do you
balance those things?
Yeah.
That's something to think about.
That is a great point to think about.
Something to ponder.
Yeah, we hope this deep dive has given you some new things to think about.
New perspectives.
Yeah, new perspectives.
Yeah.
On this really complex issue.
Absolutely.
And until next time, keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
And we'll see you on the next deep dive.